When he was Premier of Saskatchewan, Brad Wall was an outspoken champion of Canada's resource sector. Of course, he stepped down as Premier late last year. Now he's bringing his unique perspective to the corporate world, a special advisor at the law firm of Osler, Hoskin Harcourt LLP. I sat down with Brad Wall earlier today in his first interview since taking the job.
I'm honored to be joining the firm. Very much looking forward to the work. I've met a number of the lawyers that are practicing in the number of the different offices across the country, and to the extent that I have anything to offer on specifically on the energy file, but perhaps in other areas as well, in terms of the relationships that companies want to have or strategies they may want to have within the public sector, and is certainly something I'm very much looking forward to.
I would assume some of these companies too that have these capital intensive projects are a little bit worried about where perhaps on the public domain that the policy is right now. Clearly you have a foot, or you used to have both feet in that camp. Is that something you think you can help them bridge what we seem to have as a divide right now between their interests and what governments are up to?
Well, I hope so, and maybe from a more proactive basis, because I do think corporations they're responsive to what they're hearing from different governments and from different stakeholders when it comes to large infrastructure projects. But maybe the timing of the responsiveness is what needs to be looked at, and specifically how proactive, how much can those companies anticipate in advance of what governments are going to be looking for, not just governments, but stakeholders that are involved, folks with whom consultation must happen. And I think by and large, we've had companies that have been appropriately engaged on this front, but I do agree things have changed a little bit, I would say, in the last year to 18 months, where the bar has been moved, sometimes by the federal regulator, consider the NEB changes around emissions, and sometimes just from a public perception, from building that support and consensus from people within the jurisdictions that you might be proposing a project for. Perhaps the bar has changed there, and to the extent I can offer anything, I'm looking forward to try.
How hard does that become, I guess, in the sense that you will see in democracies, new governments come into power, and then that line does get shifted and changed. But we also know on the other side of it, capital is not going to be put into our infrastructure, into our resource sector, unless they have some certainty. How do you bridge those two things?
Well, this is a concern I have and have had for some time. The impact of all of these recent changes or developments in Canada on our investment climate. You know, people use different numbers, $37 billion, $40 billion worth of capital flight from our energy sector alone since last March. It's not like it left the energy sector, by the way. It's mostly in the Permian, or it's in other countries, their energy sectors. So, and part of that's because of policy risk and regulatory risk. And so I think there's some important events that are approaching us in the life of this country that will help inform decisions in the future. Those are, some of them are elections. The one coming up in the province we're sitting in right now in Ontario in June, in May for June. The election within maybe 11 or 12 or between 11 and 15 months in Alberta. The federal election in 18 months. The equalization renewal discussion that will happen across the country. And then, of course, the resolution, hopefully there is a resolution to the Trans Mountain.
To the Trans Mountain, that seems to be now going to be left to the courts. In the end, is that really the only place this can be decided? The politicians don't want to, even though they were put in a room together, still couldn't bridge their divide.
Well, it's strange. After they were all in the room together, things escalated, right? Alberta passed their turn off the taps legislation. Saskatchewan supported Alberta. BC went for the court reference. Quebec's come out and supported British Columbia. I do think there are points of leverage, though, that are still available to the federal government around funding. You'll probably remember that when my province, Saskatchewan, decided not to sign on with the carbon tax, the federal government withheld about $60 million in infrastructure dollars. Said, well, you don't qualify. I guess fair enough. But do they have that same kind of leverage? Have they perhaps even tried it with respect to the $4+ billion infrastructure 10-year agreement they signed with British Columbia just recently, I think in the last 3 weeks? These are all fair questions. I'm not sure the courts are the only option at this point. I'm not sure there wouldn't be some more leverage to be had from the federal government that has quite rightly said, look, at the pipeline's approved. And I saw the Prime Minister, I think maybe even quoted on your network here earlier today or yesterday, talking in British Columbia about the importance of getting some of our product to Tidewater so we can have more than one customer for oil. I mean, a country that has the third greatest oil reserves on the planet has one customer, one external customer. We need to fix that. And I think there's still options for the federal government to help rather than sort of just leaving it for the courts.
Part of it, too, I guess, trying to convince Canadians of the importance of that industry, of that sector to our economy. We got the latest read on the economy today, and the reason why it performed better than expected is because oil production got a nice rebound. It's very important to our economic health.
It is. We're a major oil-producing country. We should act like the energy power that we are. And frankly, those who are concerned on the environmental side can, I think, take some comfort or find the ability to be supportive of our sector, at least relative to the countries with whom we compete. Because if we don't get our oil to Tidewater, someone's still buying it. But the chances that they're buying it from a country that does care less about the environment than our sector and our country does, like a Middle Eastern country or Nigeria or Venezuela, or has maybe a troubled record on human rights, the chance that oil will come from those countries is just increased. So while oil is a transition source of energy to get us to the point where there's something better, where we don't need fossil fuels anymore, why not Canada? And I think those who are concerned about the sector and the environmental impact, I understand the concern, but it's important to realize that Canada has a lot to offer, and if we're not supplying it to the world, someone else is.
Last thing I want to ask you, a long political career, now you're at a law firm. Did you ever think you'd end up at a law firm?
No. That's the short answer. But I'm grateful.
So you're one of those rare politicians who's actually not a lawyer?
I'm not a lawyer.
My God.
They've hired a non-lawyer for the firm. I'm looking forward to the work. I'm grateful for the opportunity.